Okay, next slide, please. We'll start with, this is going to kind of work as an opening prayer. It's a litany. So, maybe I should have printed off. It seems to be wider than the screen, doesn't it? Well, let's see if we can try it. Can you figure it out? It's going to be from the scripture, so. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Can you read along? The bold? As much as you can? No. Okay, well then, Sheila, I'll do it. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep.
The Word was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made.
And the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the water.
In him was life, and the life was the light of humanity.
And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness.
The light shined in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The true light that enlightens everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world knew him not.
Then God said, "Let us make humans in our image, after our likeness." So God created humans in his own likeness.
And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. We have beheld his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father.
In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it."
And from his fullness have we all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ.
And it was so. And God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was good.
No one has ever seen God, the only Son, who is in the bosom of the Father. He has made them known, and behold, it was very good. Amen.
So, you were asked to skim over the first 11 chapters of Genesis, which covers creation through the tower, right? And there's some stories in this. Do you remember any of these stories from your childhood? Which ones especially? Cain and Abel, Tower of Babel. What? Noah and the Ark. Which one do you think, is there one you think that stood out or had more impact on you as a story than others? Noah? Tower of Babel? Why do you think that is? Grandma? Yeah, so it's the way your grandma told it or read it. And a lot of times that's how stories have impact on us, right? Is who's telling us the story, how we come by the story. That's what causes us to have it. The stories have impact on us. For me, I remember, it was the flood. And the reason why was, I don't remember who gave it to us, but we had a set of volumes of stories of the Bible. And it wasn't I think it was by Christian Scientists maybe, or maybe the Jehovah's Witnesses, I don't know. But anyway, it came into our house, and they were stories with pictures. You know, you'd read it, and they depict it. And I remember when I was reading the story of the flood, here's this picture of the ark, and there's all these people in the water around the ark swimming, trying to, and pounding on the ark trying to get in. And I remember it was a disturbing image for me because I was thinking of all these people that were outside the ark drowning. And yes, I know the story said that they were evil, but still, you know, that image of people drowning and pounding on, trying to get in and being left out was a scary and disturbing image for me as a kid. So part of what we need to keep in mind as we go through this study is that a lot of these stories we're not coming to out of a vacuum. We're coming to them from our own backgrounds, of hearing them from our grandmother or learning them in Sunday school or at camp or reading them in a Bible story book, seeing them on a felt storyboard. Yeah. You know, we come and so they're presented in certain ways, and those images get locked into our experience. And for a lot of us, as we go through this and as we go read it and we study, those images have such a powerful grip on us, it's hard to let go of them enough to expand our ideas of what they may be. What I'm going to try to do is not, in the study, is try not to hurt those memories. I want to honor those memories. But we're also going to try to expand our worldview and our understanding, which might expand past those stories. Because we've learned a few things since then. And the stories that we learned as children, we get a fuller picture of when we get to be adults. Okay. So these are the basic stories of the first 11 chapters. You have the story of creation. Then you have another story of creation, which includes the fall or the rebellion of humankind. Then you have the story of Cain and Abel and the expulsion of Cain. Then you have a genealogy which tells about the people between the creation and the flood. And then you have a brief story about Noah and his sons. And then you have a kind of explanation of what nations came out of Noah. Then you have the story of the Tower of Babel. And then you have a genealogy from the flood to Abraham. That's kind of the structure of the first 11 chapters. What we're going to explore further is the creation stories, and just focus on the creation and what comes from that. Before we do, I'm going to get off topic a little bit here. It'll come back in, but when I went through seminary, one of the things that we had to do, what the dean of the seminary wanted each of us to do, was to develop our own systematic theology. To see how what we believe all fits together in a unifying system that incorporates various components. I'm not going to deal with all the components, but there's certain components that are important in developing one's system of belief, and some of them will come handy in this study. The first one is what is called cosmology. Not to be confused with what Laura knows as cosmetology. It's different. It doesn't have anything to do with hair, I promise. What cosmology has to do is, it comes from the word cosmos, obviously. So what do you think it has to do with? Any guesses? Yeah, the universe. How the universe fits together. How the world looks. Because when we look at the various religions, each of them come with a certain worldview or view of the universe, the world as they knew it. And it's limited to what they knew and what they saw. So the cosmology that they had in place is going to be different than the cosmology we have today, because we know a lot more about the universe than they did, right? What we'll get into is that the Hebrew cosmology, or how they saw the world formed or ordered, was quite unique. And as we get into certain verses of the creation story, with God creating, we can see how different elements of that fit together. But they had a distinct idea of what made up the world, or what made up the universe. So when God created it, what it looked like. And there are certain understandings of why they had those beliefs. And a lot of it had to do with what they saw and dealt with every day. The second aspect is the second part of the system is what is called eschatology. And this deals with endings, for lack of a better word. Eschatology talks about end times or last times, or what happens to us when we die, how the world's going to come to an end. All those things is part of a theological system. Do we believe we're going to live forever, or do we believe that when we die, or when we physically die, that's the end of it, we're no more? Is God going to bring the end of the world in a certain way? Or is it just going to end up, the world's just going to end up how it's going to end up? Or will it just keep going on forever? All those are questions that come into eschatology. And eschatology shapes what we believe and why we believe what we believe and why we're passionate about. We have, if we believe that a world is going to end in a certain way for certain reasons, then that orders our priorities of how we want to live our life. which leads us to another aspect of systematic theology, and that's ethics. Ethics has to do with how we live our lives. It talks about morality, what we see as good and evil. How do we determine what is good and evil? Is it all relative? Does it fit together? Is there a clear sense of good? Is there a clear sense of evil? Who determines that? How do we distinguish between good and evil? And how do we make that a practice in our lives? It's all questions of ethics. And nearly every profession in the world has a question about ethics, has an ethical consideration. Okay? The medical field certainly has ethics. Business has ethics. Sometimes some people say that business ethics is an oxymoron. The military has ethics. There are certain conscientious objectors who probably would say that military ethics is an oxymoron. But every aspect of what we do in this world has an ethical question. What is right? What is wrong? What is good? What is evil? How do we make that determination? So it's only natural that when we're putting together what we believe and how we believe and why we believe, that part of that is a question of what we see as good. How do we determine what is good and evil? And part of the way we determine what is good and evil is the final category that I'm going to present, and that's epistemology. Epistemology is the search for truth, the study of truth, the study of meaning. Why we believe what we believe, and how we come to believe what we believe. In many ways, epistemology is a very relevant subject in these days when we're talking about fake news and disinformation. Because it asks the question, how do we know what is true and what is not true? How do we make that determination? That's a theological question. How do we know what is true? As Christians, as people who practice our faith, we have certain ideas and we have a certain understanding of how we can obtain the truth. But we have to constantly reevaluate whether that is working for us. All these, when we're going through Genesis, all these are going to come in, all these categories are going to come in to a certain extent. In creation, it's probably most going to be cosmology, but when we start getting into looking at Cain and Abel, or Noah and the flood, or the Abraham stories in the life of patriarchs, and certainly ethics are going to come in, and epistemology is going to come in, and all these others are going to come in as aspect too. I'm not going to ask you at the end of the study to have a system. I'm not going to expect you or even ask you to have a systematic theology when you get to the end of this. But I want you to have a greater understanding of how what you believe fits together. Does that make sense? Are you following me so far? Am I getting too off into the weeds? Thank you for Sheila for keeping up with the slides. And I don't know if you were watching the slides when I was going through these. So, let's start talking about Genesis 1 through 2. What is it, 1 or 2 what? 2:15. So, there's some critical themes to look at. The first one is in what form, is talk about God's design. In what form did creation start? Somebody read the first 2 verses for me. Okay, do you see a contradiction in those first 2 verses? Because I do. Right. First it says it was a formless void, right? What do you think of when you think of a formless void? You think of what? Nothing, right? Just space, right? But then it says the Spirit hovered over the waters of the deep. Is water nothing? No. It's a substance, right? This became a debate back and forth. And it's been going on throughout the church history. Is when we're talking about the creation of the world, are we talking about creation ex nihilo? Or out of nothing? Or creation out of something? Where it's mostly been settled is that it has to be out of nothing. Because then you have the question of where did the something come from? Right? There was a theologian, Catholic theologian, back in the Middle Ages, by the name of Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas pretty much changed the way of thinking. He was an academic, and the whole way of understanding pretty much everything religion, a lot of it changed with Aquinas because he was very academic and he made very persuasive arguments, and much of the church and a lot of what we believe today was shaped by Thomas Aquinas. One of the most significant works that he came up with is what he's called Summa Theologica, which is summary of theology. And I remember when I was taking philosophy class at seminary, I did a paper on it. It's long, and it's dense, and it's repetitive. He was an academic, but he wasn't a very accessible writer. He was tough to read. But this is what I got from him. He posited what he called the prime mover. He says, if you think of creation or evolution or how the world works, you think of it as something in motion, right? Something has to start that motion, right? But something has to start that which started that motion. And something has to start that which started that motion. And he says, but we can't have what is called ultimate regression, which is just constant going back to what started this, to what started this, to what started this, to what started this. He says, at some point, there has to be, instead of a mover, there has to be a prime mover. There has to be a start. And he says, that start is God. It's a simplistic way of understanding his point of view. And he's taken a lot of criticism for the point of view since then, because they said he just arbitrarily put that. He just said logic has to put that. Well, why? So it didn't end the argument. Anselm did the similar thing, which he posited, which was the proof for the existence of God. And he said, it's similar to what Aquinas said. He says, God is that which nothing can be greater than. Does that make sense? Something's greater than something else, but in order for God to exist, in order for God to be God, then nothing can be greater than God. And he also said, how can we describe God? We can only describe what God is not. If we're finite, then God must be infinite. If we're limited in our knowledge, then God must be omniscient and know everything. If we're human, then God must be divine. God must be everything we're not. Otherwise, God is just merely one of us. My question is, so what? So, this is all theological conjecture, but what this does is it tells us that the Hebrews, when they're trying to write their creation story, when they're trying to figure out how everything started, they were trying to figure it out too. And part of them want to say, well, God had to start everything, that nothing could exist. But the only way they could understand of creating something is to take things and put it together. Right? It's the only way they could understand how something can be created. You know, you want to create a garment, You have to take a couple, you want to create a dress or a suit, you have to take pieces of cloth and sew them together to create it. If you want to build a tower, you have to take, which comes later in Genesis, you have to take ground and water and bake it together to make mud and then dry it to form a brick. You have to take something and put it together in order to make something. Which reminds me of the story. It's a group of scientists who came to the conclusion that science had advanced so far that they had no need of God anymore. That they could do anything that God could do, right? So they felt that it was necessary to tell God that God was now irrelevant, that they could take it over. So one of the scientists was assigned to go up to the mountaintop into a quiet place in meditation and commune with God and tell God God's place in the world. So the scientist goes up to the top of a mountain, calls God, God answers, and the scientist informs God, we don't need you anymore, we can do everything that you can do. God says, oh really? Would you be disturbed if I don't believe you? The scientist said, well, no. I can see how you might be skeptical. God says, you mind proving to me that you can exist without me? Scientist says, yeah, what do you want me to do? Perform a miracle. Okay, what miracle? How about my greatest miracle? Make a human being like I made a human being. You read the Bible, you know how I made a human being. Make a human being. So the scientist remembers from the story of creation that God took dirt and out of the earth created Adam. So the scientist reaches down and grabs a couple of handfuls of dirt, and God says, what are you doing? So I'm creating a human being like you did. God says, get your own dirt. So God had to create out of nothing in order for it to exist. So what do we make of the waters over the deep? The ancients, the religion, the Hebrew religion, or the point of view, again, was not in a vacuum. There were other religions that existed, and there was other explanations of how the world came to be. And most of the religions, almost all the religions at that time, had water be a major aspect of the way they understood the world. Why? Because they were near a large body of water. And the lake, the large body of water, was the least understandable aspect. In a lot of ways, you went out on the water and you were chancing things. Waves were, storms would come up and cause waves and tides, and they didn't understand all the things. It seems like the water had a force all of its own, which they respected, and respected the fact that they didn't know everything about it. And so it was kind of this mysterious force. And in many ways, that water was seen as a force that existed from all times, and it was chaotic. It was chaos. And it was deep and mysterious and primeval. So when they're coming into forming this cosmology of how they saw the world, they saw that, of course, water existed forever. So when God is creating out of nothing, of course, water's going to be there. Now, for us, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but at that time, this deep, mysterious force, water being this deep, mysterious force, made it almost divine in nature. Am I losing you? So, that's how we can reconcile creation out of nothing, formless void, in the Spirit over the waters of the deep. If you look in your book, there is let's see if I can find it. Let's get to the right chapter here. On page 8, there are affirmations. First affirmation is that God creates creation and has a specific purpose for it. So when we start going through the days, what you will see is a purpose that God is following. God seems to have a plan. So let's read the first day. Will somebody read from where? Was it Marilyn who was reading? From where she left off? Yeah. Do we have a mic up here? Alan? You want to use the mic and read? And start with verse 3 and go through until there was evening and morning in the first day.
And God said, "Let there be light."
Is it on?
And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, day one.
Okay. So, what is happening here? God's actually, what is God creating? Except for it's not the sun and the moon yet. It's light and darkness, right? Yeah, but it didn't have an identity of darkness until light was created. Opposite define each other, right? Yeah. But darkness was understood at a deeper level when light was formed, right? We don't understand how dark something is until the light is turned on, right? So what is beginning is that God is beginning to order the universe. Right? So everything is formless and void. It's dark. Nothing has form, nothing has order, it's chaos. So the first thing to do is we separate light and darkness. God creates light so that there is a separation of light and darkness. We know what his light is, we know what his darkness is, there's a separation. There's a beginning of an order. Okay, the next day.
And God said, "There be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and separated the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and there was an evening, and there was a morning, a second day.
What is a firmament? Dividing line between what? The water above and the water below. In ancient Hebrew cosmology, when they looked up into the sky and they saw blue sky, what they understood was that there was water. The heavens were all just water. That's why we get rain. That's why we get snow. That's why we get hail. So in order for God to create something for us to live, God had to separate that water to the water above, to the water below, which the water below bubbles up and gives us streams and rivers and lakes. But that the whole world is surrounded by water. That's how they saw the world. That's why the sky's blue. Water's blue. So the sky is blue because that's water up there. Later on, when we read the flood, why is it so devastating? Because God is letting the water come down from above in rain, but also water is letting loose all the water that God is also letting loose all the water that's underneath. So it's coming from below and under and above. So it's much more devastating. This is a worldview. This is how this is how they saw the world. Now, to us, who know that the heavens are empty space, that sounds kind of silly. But to them, it made perfect sense. And that firmament was clear. That's why the skies are blue. That's why the heavens are blue. It's because that firmament is clear. But it is a second step in creating order. Because God first creates time, separation of light and dark, which will become clearer, and also space. Right? Next day.
And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear," and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the water called the seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was good. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding, seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose tree was in itself after his kind, and God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day.
Okay? Next day.
And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens, and to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens, so give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the 4th day.
Okay. Do you see a inconsistency there? How is there morning and evening before the sun and the moon were created? If God created the sun to rule the day and the moon to rule the night and to distinguish day from night, how were the days before that separated? This is where we have to a certain extent, give some poetic license to the writing. And it's the danger of taking things too literally, because yes, there's light and day, but how long was that first day and night, evening and morning, the first day? How long was that first day? How long was that second day? Maybe the third day was 24 hours now that we have the sun and the moon. But how long does it exist? So people have always said that, okay, the theory of the world existing for millions and millions of years, the universe existing for million and million years, how can you reconcile with that with the Genesis account? Well, you're going to reconcile it because if you try to put the literal scientific understanding on this story of Genesis, it's going to have inconsistencies. That doesn't make it not true. What it makes it is that they're trying to tell it in the way that they can understand it the best. And so maybe that first day was 1,000,000 years. Maybe the second was another 1,000,000. Don't know. What we do know is that God is, again, ordering the universe by space and time. And that time has often been described as merely a human invention. It's not. It's come to us. We come to an understanding of time because we have day and night, because the sun, because the earth orbits, and we have a period of darkness and we have a period of light, and we see it light and day, and by that way we can measure time. We can see one day from another, which keeps us sane. The worst torture you can do is to put somebody in a room with light on all the time, with no windows. It drives them crazy. It literally will drive them insane because they have no sense of time. They have no sense that how much time has passed because they can't see day and night. They can't see morning and evening. We have to have that structure. We're wired for that structure. So naturally, the God who cares about us, who creates us, has that in the universe so that we can understand and we can live. And we can make sense of the universe. Okay, next day.
And God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the firmament of the heavens. So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, a fifth day.
Okay, so again, it's bringing order to the universe. There's the beings that are being created, whether it be the beings in the sea or in the sky, on the earth. All of them can reproduce. God doesn't have to create every being on earth continually. They start reproducing. And so that's God has placed into motion the creative process of the earth and the sea and the sky. The earth, the universe, in a sense, becomes a living organism reproducing as it goes. Next day. I'm trying to keep somewhat on time here, so I'm starting to rush. I got a little bit verbose earlier.
Then God said, Let the earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Did I go too far?
No.
Oh. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, See, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for good.
So, a couple things. First of all, it says, created everything of its kind. One time I was asked whether I believe in the theory of evolution, and I said, yes, of course I do. And they said, well, how do you deal? The person was theologically, they said, so how do you distinguish the theory of evolution? I said, well, from what I understand, evolution happens within each species. What we don't see is something evolving from one species to another species. And this they see described. So, cows develop over time. We have interbred different breeds of cattle. But cattle don't breed with horses. It's a different species. A bird doesn't breed with a fish. It's a different species. So God, as part of God's order. So it talks about, this is all fitting into a biological system, which speaks of an intelligence going on. What is more interesting is when human beings are being created, and the language that is being used when God is speaking. Let us make human beings in our image. Who's we? Are they talking about more than one God and that God is the chairman of the gods? Some people at that time believed that. That might be a way of where, and maybe the way early believers might have believed that until they became more sure that there is one God. Maybe that's their way of coming into belief into it. The oldest book in the Bible is Job. It's the oldest book. In Job, there is a reference to God presenting a case to a council. How do we make sense of that? When we started with a reading, a litany. And the litany had words from Genesis and words from the beginning of the gospel according to John. The bold was the words from the gospel according to John. What I was reading was the words from Genesis. And John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We come to understand that as Jesus Christ, right? But in Greek, it is just logos. It's just word. It's just communication. There is a philosophy, or an understanding of Genesis that says, in creation, God is appearing in more than one way. And there's a reason why God says, let us create man in our image, male and female. Is that there's two types of creation going on. There's a birthing going on, where things are given life and given the ability to reproduce. And then there's an order going on, where things are put in their place and given a purpose. And that these two things that are happening in creation are masculine and feminine in nature. And that what we understand as God is God as both male and female. Both masculine in its way of ordering and feminine in its way of birthing. It's a way we can understand it. How we make sense of it is that what is happening in His creation is that all that is happening at once, and that there is one force behind it. It may appear in certain ways in a feminine way. It may appear in certain ways in a masculine way. But there's a single force behind it, and that single force of creation and ordering and making sense of the world that is chaos is God. And that's how we can understand creation in this creation story. Next week, we'll talk about the other creation story that we find in Genesis. Five minutes over. Did I lose anybody by understanding or disagreement? Arguments? Was this helpful? I want to make sure it's not a flight of fancy and just me spinning off stuff and you going, okay, that was all interesting, but what does it have to do with the price of rice in China? Any comments or questions? Okay. Each chapter has its own assignment. At the beginning, at the heading of each chapter, there's a corresponding Bible passages. This particular study has a lot of other activities, I think they have, in the leader's guide, they have suggestions for having you act out things and write poetry and do those things. I don't teach class that way.